Korean mafia boss falls in love with his daughter's black nanny. The mansion is silent except for the sound of blood dripping onto marble floors. Min-jun Kang stands in the center of his luxury living room, his white shirt soaked crimson, holding his 6-year-old daughter Soo-ah against his chest. The little girl sleeps peacefully, clutching her stuffed rabbit, completely unaware of the violence that just unfolded. But across the room in the doorway, Naomi Carter stands frozen with her suitcase in hand, tears streaming down her beautiful brown face. Her voice cracks as she whispers, "I can't do this anymore, Min-jun. I can't watch her love someone who'll end up dead." Her hands shake as she grips that suitcase tighter, knuckles going pale. Min-jun's hand trembles as he reaches toward her, his dark eyes desperate in a way no one has ever seen from the feared leader of the Baekho Syndicate. His voice comes out rough, broken. "Then you've already made your choice. But how did a Korean mafia boss and an African-American nanny end up here? How did two people from completely different worlds fall so deeply in love that it nearly destroyed everything? Let me take you back 3 months, to where this impossible love story began. 3 months earlier, Naomi Carter sat in a cramped unemployment office in Los Angeles, surrounded by flickering fluorescent lights and the smell of cheap coffee. At 29 years old, she was supposed to have her life together. She had been a child psychologist, someone who dedicated her life to healing broken kids, to saving the ones the system forgot. But after years of watching children slip through the cracks, after losing too many kids she couldn't save, Naomi burned out completely. She walked away from her career and now she was paying the price. Bills covered her small kitchen table like a paper avalanche. Rent was 3 months overdue. The eviction notice had arrived that morning, bright pink and impossible to ignore. Naomi stared at her bank account on her phone, the numbers glowing mockingly. $432. That was all that stood between her and homelessness. Her best friend and roommate, Grace Okafor, found her that evening sitting in the dark, just staring at those bills. Grace was a Nigerian immigrant who worked as an ICU nurse, tough as nails but with a heart bigger than anyone Naomi had ever met. Grace flipped on the lights and put her hands on her hips. "Okay, enough of this pity party. You need money? I know where rich people are practically throwing it at nannies. Private childcare girl. These wealthy families pay crazy money for someone with your credentials." Naomi looked up at her friend with exhausted eyes. "Grace, I left psychology because I couldn't save kids anymore. How is being a nanny any different?" Grace sat down beside her and took her hand. "Because you wouldn't be fighting the system. You'd be helping one child in one home where you might actually make a difference. Just try it. What do you have to lose?" So Naomi started applying. And that's when she discovered that her credentials meant nothing compared to the color of her skin. The first family took one look at her during the video interview and suddenly the position was filled. The second family told her she was overqualified, but their tone suggested something else entirely. The third family said they were looking for someone who would be a better cultural fit. By the 10th rejection, Naomi knew exactly what was happening. She was being rejected not because she wasn't good enough, but because she was black. Then came the listing that changed everything. No photo required. No video interview. Just a formal application and an address for an in-person meeting. The pay was astronomical, almost suspicious. $2,500 a week for one child, live-in position optional. Naomi almost didn't apply, but desperation makes you take chances you normally wouldn't. 2 days later, she found herself driving through the Hollywood Hills, climbing higher and higher until the city sprawled below like a carpet of lights. Her beat-up Honda felt completely out of place as she approached the address. When she turned the final corner, her breath caught in her throat. The estate wasn't just a house. It was a fortress. 20-foot walls surrounded the property, topped with cameras that tracked her car's every movement. Armed guards stood at a gate that looked like it could stop a tank. The mansion beyond was modern and cold, all glass and steel and sharp angles, more intimidating than beautiful. Naomi's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Everything in her body screamed to turn around, to drive away. But that eviction notice flashed in her mind, and she pulled up to the guardhouse. After scanning her ID and making 3 separate phone calls, the guards finally let her through. The driveway curved through perfectly manicured gardens that somehow felt lifeless despite their beauty. Naomi parked near the front entrance, feeling completely out of place in her simple dress and cardigan while security personnel in expensive suits watched her every move. The front door opened before she could knock. A stone-faced man in his 40s, later she'd learn his name was Yuneo Park, looked her up and down with unconcealed suspicion. He said nothing, just gestured for her to follow. The interior of the mansion matched the outside, All cold marble and modern art that probably cost more than Naomi would make in a lifetime. Every surface gleamed. Every corner felt watched. Eunicio led her to a study with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. And that's when Naomi first saw Min-jun Kang. He stood with his back to her, hands clasped behind him, staring out at Los Angeles like he owned it. Maybe he did in his own way. When he turned around, Naomi felt her breath catch for an entirely different reason than the mansion. Min-jun was 38 but carried himself like a man who'd lived 1,000 years. He was tall for a Korean man, with sharp, angular features that might have been handsome if they weren't so severe. His eyes were the darkest she'd ever seen, and when they landed on her, Naomi felt like he was reading every secret she'd ever kept. He wore a suit that probably cost more than her car, perfectly tailored, not a thread out of place. Everything about him screamed power, control, danger. He didn't offer to shake her hand. Didn't smile. Didn't waste time on pleasantries. Min-jun Kang simply looked at her resume, then back at her, and spoke in accented but perfect English. Child psychologist. Impressive credentials. Why are you applying to be a nanny, Miss Carter? Naomi had prepared for this question, but something about his directness made her want to be honest. Because the system breaks more children than it saves and I couldn't watch it anymore. Something flickered in Min-jun's eyes at that, there and gone so fast she might have imagined it. He set down her resume and walked closer, studying her like she was a puzzle he needed to solve. My daughter needs stability, Miss Carter. Not therapy. Not someone trying to fix her or save her. She needs routine, consistency, and someone who can follow instructions without asking questions they don't need answers to. Can you do that? His tone wasn't cruel, but it was cold, distant, like he was hiring someone to organize his files, not care for his child. Naomi should have said no. Every instinct she developed as a psychologist told her this was wrong, that this man was dangerous, that this situation was far more complicated than a simple nanny position. But then she saw movement on the grand staircase behind Min-jun. A small figure barely visible in the shadows. A little girl no more than 6 years old, peeked through the banister rails. She had delicate features that must have come from her mother, and she clutched a worn stuffed rabbit like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to earth. But it was her eyes that made Naomi's heart break. Those eyes were completely hollow, empty in a way no child's eyes should ever be. The girl stared at Naomi with the expression of someone who'd seen things that shattered her entire world. In that moment, Naomi didn't see Soo-ah Kang. She saw her younger brother Marcus 15 years ago, after he'd witnessed a drive-by shooting in their neighborhood. She saw that same hollowed-out expression, that same desperate clutching at comfort objects, that same silent scream for help that no one else seemed to hear. Marcus had been 16 when gang violence took him, when all of Naomi's psychology training and desperate love couldn't save him. And here was another traumatized child, another little soul crying out silently for someone to see them, to help them. Naomi knew she should walk away. She knew getting involved with whatever had traumatized that little girl meant entering a world she didn't understand and probably couldn't survive. But looking at Soo-ah, she saw a chance to do what she couldn't do for Marcus. A chance to actually save one child. Against every ounce of her better judgment, Naomi looked back at Min-jun Kang and heard herself say, "When do I start?" Min-jun's expression didn't change, but he gave a single nod. "Tomorrow. Eunicio will send you the details. The pay is weekly, deposited directly. You'll have your own suite in the West Wing. My mother lives here as well and manages the household. You follow her rules and mine." He turned back to the window, dismissing her. "That's all, Miss Carter." Naomi left the mansion in a daze, her mind spinning. She sat in her car for a full 5 minutes before she could even turn the key. What had she just agreed to? That night, as she was packing her essential belongings, her phone rang. The name on the screen made her stomach drop. Detective James Morrison. Morrison had been her brother Marcus's friend, a young cop who tried so hard to steer Marcus away from gang life. After Marcus died, Morrison had stayed in Naomi's life like a protective older brother she never asked for. Now he was a detective, and the suspicion in his voice when she answered told her this wasn't a social call. "Naomi, I need you to tell me you didn't take a job at 4247 Skyline Drive." His voice was tight, controlled in a way that meant he was trying not to yell. Naomi's heart sank. "How did you even know about that?" Morrison let out a long breath. "I ran the address. I run every address connected to you because I promised Marcus I'd keep you safe. Do you know who Min-jun Kang is?" Naomi sat down on her bed, surrounded by half-packed boxes. "A father with a daughter who needs help," she said quietly. Morrison's laugh was bitter. He's the head of the Baekho Syndicate, Naomi. One of the most powerful Korean organized crime operations on the West Coast. The man you just agreed to work for has blood on his hands. A lot of blood. I've been trying to build a case against him for 3 years. The room felt like it was spinning. Naomi thought about those guards, those cameras, the fortress-like walls. Of course. How had she not seen it? But then she thought about Soo-ah's hollow eyes, and something hardened in her chest. Then he's also a father with a traumatized daughter who needs someone to help her heal. That's who I agreed to work for. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Naomi, these aren't good people. Whatever happened to that little girl, it's because of the life her father chose. You can't save her. All you're going to do is get yourself hurt or worse. Naomi closed her eyes, seeing Marcus's face, seeing Soo-ah's empty expression. Maybe. But I have to try. After she hung up, Naomi sat alone in her apartment, staring at the boxes she'd packed, wondering if she was making the biggest mistake of her life. She didn't know that in 3 months she'd be standing in a mansion covered in blood, choosing between running for her life and staying for a love she never saw coming. She didn't know that the cold, dangerous man who'd barely looked at her would become someone she couldn't imagine living without. And she definitely didn't know that saving one traumatized little girl would end up saving all 3 of them. If you're hooked on this story and want to see how a nanny breaks through the walls of a mafia boss's heart, hit that subscribe button right now because this love story is about to get dangerous, passionate, and absolutely unforgettable. But I need to know, have you ever taken a job or made a choice that seemed dangerous but felt right in your heart? Drop your stories in the comments below because Naomi's about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous choices lead to the most beautiful destinations. Naomi's first morning at the Kang estate began at exactly 6 a.m. when the sun hadn't even fully risen over the Hollywood Hills. She'd barely slept in her new suite, a room that was probably 3 times the size of her old apartment but felt cold and impersonal despite its luxury. Every sound in the massive house had kept her awake: footsteps in distant hallways, the hum of security systems, the feeling of being watched even though she was alone. When she finally ventured downstairs, dressed professionally in simple black pants and a modest blouse, she walked into a war she didn't know she'd enlisted in. Min-jun Kang, Min-jun's mother, stood in the enormous chef's kitchen like a general surveying her territory. At 62 years old, she was still striking, with sharp features that showed exactly where her son got his intimidating presence. Her silver hair was pulled back in a perfect bun, and she wore traditional Korean hanbok even this early in the morning, every fold precise and deliberate. When Ji-won's eyes landed on Naomi, there was no warmth, no welcome, just cold assessment and clear disapproval. Ji-won spoke in Korean first, a rapid stream of words Naomi couldn't understand but whose tone needed no translation. When Naomi stood there helplessly, Ji-won switched to heavily accented English, each word sharp as a blade. "You are the new nanny. American." She said American like it was a disease. "You won't last a week. This is a Korean household with Korean ways. We have had 5 nannies in 2 years. All failed. All left." She moved closer to Naomi, and despite being several inches shorter, somehow looked down at her. Soo-ah does not need another stranger pretending to care before they abandon her. If you are here for easy money, leave now and save us all the trouble. Naomi felt her face flush, anger and hurt mixing together, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm here to help your granddaughter, Mrs. Kang. That's all." Ji-won's laugh was bitter. "Help. Everyone wants to help. No one can. My granddaughter is broken, and you cannot fix her with your American psychology and your smiles. Now breakfast is at 7. Soo-ah eats in the morning room. You will sit with her. She will ignore you. Do not force her to speak. Do not touch her. Do not fail us." With that, Ji-won turned away, dismissing Naomi like she was nothing. Breakfast was exactly as painful as Ji-won predicted. The morning room was all windows overlooking a garden that probably required a full-time staff to maintain. Soo-ah sat at a table far too large for one small child, picking at traditional Korean breakfast foods that sat untouched on expensive china. She wore a school uniform even though it was summer, her long dark hair in perfect braids, her mother's bracelet dangling too large on her tiny wrist. When Naomi entered and sat across from her, Soo-ah didn't even look up. Naomi tried everything she'd learned in her years as a child psychologist. She introduced herself warmly. She commented on the beautiful garden. She asked gentle questions about the stuffed rabbit, Haru, that sat in the chair beside Soo-ah. Nothing. Not even a flicker of acknowledgement. It was like Naomi was invisible, or worse, like Soo-ah had learned that caring about people only led to pain, so she'd stopped caring altogether. After 30 minutes of one-sided conversation and growing cold eggs, Naomi understood why 5 other nannies had failed. This wasn't just a shy child. This was a child who'd locked herself away so deep that finding her would take more than friendly conversation. After breakfast, Naomi explored the parts of the mansion she was allowed to access. Soo-ah's room was on the 2nd floor, a little girl's fantasy of princess decorations and expensive toys, but something about it felt staged, like someone had tried to buy happiness and failed. What caught Naomi's attention was the art table by the window, covered in drawings. While Soo-ah was at her Mandarin lesson with a private tutor, Naomi carefully looked through the sketches. Her blood went cold. These weren't the innocent drawings of a 6-year-old. Page after page showed violence rendered in a child's hand. Crude figures with red marker blood. A woman lying on the ground, eyes X'd out. Men with guns. A little girl hiding behind furniture. The images were disturbing enough, but what made Naomi's professional instincts scream was the repetition. The same scene over and over, drawn compulsively like Soo-ah was trying to process something her young mind couldn't comprehend. This child had witnessed something traumatic, something violent, and she was trapped in that moment, reliving it through art because she couldn't speak about it. Naomi was still looking at the drawings when she felt a presence behind her. She turned to find Min-jun standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. In daylight, he was somehow even more intimidating than during the interview, his presence filling the room despite his stillness. He looked at the drawings in Naomi's hands and something flickered across his face, grief maybe or guilt before the mask slammed back down. "My office. Now." His voice was flat, emotionless, but Naomi heard the command in it. She followed him through corridors that felt more like a maze, down to a first-floor office that was all dark wood and leather, with security monitors covering one wall showing every angle of the property. Min-jun closed the door and turned to face her, and for the first time, Naomi saw something dangerous in his eyes. "There are rules in this house, Miss Carter. Rules that exist for everyone's safety, including yours." He moved to his desk, every movement controlled and precise. "Rule 1, you don't ask about my work. Ever. What I do, where I go, who I meet, none of it concerns you. Rule 2, you don't leave the compound without my permission and security escort. The world outside these walls is more dangerous than you understand. Rule 3, you don't get attached to my daughter. You do your job, you help her if you can, but you don't become someone she'll mourn when you inevitably leave." That third rule hit Naomi harder than it should have. She stepped closer to his desk, her own anger rising. "She's not a possession to guard, Mr. Kang. She's a broken little girl who watched something terrible happen, and those drawings prove she's drowning in trauma. You can't just lock her in a beautiful prison and expect her to heal." Min-jun's jaw tightened, his hands pressing flat on the desk. "You don't know what broken looks like, Miss Carter. You've been here one day. You know nothing about my daughter, about what she's survived, about what I've had to do to keep her alive." His voice was rising now, that cold control cracking just slightly. Naomi met his eyes without flinching. "Yes, I do. I know exactly what broken looks like because I watched my 16-year-old brother die from a gunshot wound while I held his hand. I watched trauma destroy him long before the bullet did. I watched him draw pictures just like your daughter's, trying to make sense of violence that has no sense. So don't tell me I don't understand broken, Mr. Kang. I've lived with broken. I've buried broken. And I'll be damned if I watch another child disappear into that darkness without fighting for them." The silence in that office was deafening. Min-jun stared at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, his armor cracked completely. She saw pain in his eyes, raw and deep, the pain of a father who didn't know how to save his child. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, almost vulnerable. "Then help her. But don't make her love you, Miss Carter. Love is the most dangerous thing I can let into this house." He turned away from her, looking at those security monitors, ending the conversation. Naomi left his office with her heart pounding, understanding that she'd just seen behind the mask of the feared Mafia boss, and what she'd found there was a man as broken as his daughter. The next 2 weeks were a slow, patient dance with a child who'd forgotten how to trust. Naomi didn't force conversation. She didn't demand eye contact or affection. Instead, she remembered her training, the techniques she'd used with traumatized children before burnout made her quit. Every afternoon, she set up art supplies on Soo-ah's table and painted her own pictures. Simple things at first, flowers and trees and sunsets. She painted in silence while Soo-ah watched from her bed, clutching Haru, those hollow eyes tracking every brushstroke. On the 4th day, Soo-ah moved closer, still silent, still distant, but close enough to see the colors Naomi mixed. On the sixth day, tiny fingers reached out and touched a paintbrush, then quickly pulled back like she'd touched fire. On the ninth day, Soo-ah picked up a brush and made a single stroke on the paper, a line of blue that might have been sky or ocean or just color for the sake of color. Naomi felt tears prick her eyes, but she didn't react, didn't make a big deal of it, just kept painting her own picture like this breakthrough wasn't the most beautiful thing she'd seen in years. These painting sessions reminded Naomi so much of her brother Marcus that sometimes she had to step away to compose herself. She remembered being 19 years old, home from college for the summer, finding 13-year-old Marcus drawing pictures of the drive-by shooting he'd witnessed. Their mother hadn't understood, had wanted to throw the drawings away, but Naomi had just started her psychology degree and she'd insisted Marcus needed to process the trauma. They'd spent that whole summer painting together and slowly Marcus had started to heal. Or so Naomi had thought. 3 years later, he'd still ended up dead, and Naomi had carried the guilt of failing him ever since. But with Soo-ah she had a second chance. A chance to do it right this time. Late one night, after Soo-ah had finally fallen asleep, Naomi stayed in the child's room, singing softly. It was an old lullaby her mother used to sing, something about stars and dreams and being safe. She didn't know that 3 floors below in his office, Min-jun Kang sat in front of his security monitors watching her. He'd been reviewing the day's footage like he did every night, checking for threats, for vulnerabilities, for anything out of place. But his eyes had caught on the monitor showing his daughter's room and he'd frozen. There was Naomi, this woman he'd known for 2 weeks, sitting beside his daughter's bed in the dim glow of a nightlight, singing in a voice that was soft and genuine and full of a tenderness his house hadn't heard in 3 years. Soo-ah was actually sleeping peacefully, not the fitful, nightmare-plagued sleep she usually endured, but real rest. And Min-jun found his hand moving almost unconsciously to the screen, his fingers touching the image of Naomi's face like he could feel the warmth of her through the cold glass. Hyungnim. Uniseo's voice made Min-jun jerk his hand back like he'd been burned. His right-hand man stood in the doorway of the office, concern etched on his features. Uniseo had known Min-jun since they were boys in Busan, had followed him to America, had buried bodies beside him. They were closer than brothers, which meant Uniseo could speak truths others couldn't. Be careful. She's not one of us. She doesn't understand this life. If you let her in, it will only end badly. Min-jun's expression hardened back into its usual mask. I'm not letting anyone in. She's an employee. But even as he said it, he knew it was a lie. Something about Naomi Carter was getting under his skin, and that terrified him more than any rival gang or police investigation ever could. The dinner that followed a few nights later proved just how complicated the household dynamics were becoming. Ji-won had insisted on a formal family meal, something she did once a week to maintain the pretense of normalcy. Naomi was invited only because she was Soo-ah's caretaker, and Ji-won made sure she knew she was barely tolerated. The dining room was formal and cold, with a table that could seat 20 but held only 4, Min-jun at the head, Ji-won to his right, Naomi to his left, and Soo-ah beside Naomi. Ji-won spent the entire meal making passive-aggressive comments that didn't quite cross the line into open insults but made her feelings clear. In Korea we teach children respect and discipline. American methods are so permissive, so focused on feelings instead of strength. Perhaps that is why American children are so entitled. She smiled sweetly at Naomi while delivering the barb. Of course, I'm sure your methods work fine for American families. Naomi bit her tongue, remembering she needed this job, needed to stay for Soo-ah. But what happened next made every uncomfortable comment worth it. Quietly, without fanfare, Soo-ah's small hand slipped under the table and found Naomi's. The little girl's fingers wrapped around Naomi's palm, holding on like Naomi was a lifeline. It was the first physical affection Soo-ah had shown anyone in 3 years, and Naomi had to blink back tears as she gently squeezed the small hand in return. She glanced up and found Min-jun staring at their joined hands beneath the table, his expression transformed. The cold, dangerous mask had slipped, and what Naomi saw there was wonder and gratitude and something that looked almost like hope. His eyes met hers across the table, and in that moment, something passed between them, something neither of them was ready to acknowledge but couldn't deny. This wasn't just about Soo-ah anymore. Something was shifting in the foundation of this broken family, and both of them felt it. As the weeks progressed, Naomi found herself doing something she'd never expected. She started learning Korean. Not just a few phrases but really learning, staying up late with language apps and YouTube videos, stumbling through basic conversations. She did it initially to communicate better with the household staff, to understand when Ji-won muttered things she wasn't meant to understand. But it became more than that. It became a bridge. One morning, about a month into her employment, Naomi greeted Ji-won in careful Korean. "Good morning, Mrs. Kang. Thank you for breakfast. It's very delicious." Her pronunciation was terrible and she definitely messed up the formal verb conjugation, but Ji-won stopped dead in her tracks. The older woman stared at Naomi with something that wasn't quite approval but wasn't hostility either. "You are learning Korean," Ji-won said slowly in English like she couldn't quite believe it. "The others, they never tried. They expected us to change for them." Something in the matriarch's expression softened just slightly. Over the next week, Ji-won began correcting Naomi's pronunciation, teaching her the proper way to address elders, showing her how to make simple Korean dishes. They weren't friends, not even close, but the walls between them were developing cracks. One evening, while they were preparing dinner together in the kitchen, something unprecedented happened. Ji-won began to talk, really talk, her hands moving automatically through the familiar motions of chopping vegetables while her carefully maintained facade crumbled. "My son's wife, Min-hee, she was chosen for him. Good family, good connections, important for business. I told him love was less important than duty, that he would learn to care for her." Ji-won's knife stilled on the cutting board, her eyes distant. She was a good woman. Kind. She tried to love him and maybe he tried too. But there was no passion, no real connection. Just duty. Naomi listened, barely breathing, afraid to interrupt this rare moment of vulnerability. Ji-won continued, her voice thick with guilt. 3 years ago there was business, a rival faction. They came to the house as a message to show Min-jun he was not untouchable. Min-hee, she was just in the wrong place. And Soo-ah saw everything. Saw her mother die. A tear slid down Ji-won's weathered cheek. "My son married without love because I told him to. And that loveless marriage got his wife killed. My granddaughter is broken because I valued power over happiness. So you see, Miss Carter, some things cannot be fixed." Naomi reached out and gently touched Ji-won's hand. "Maybe not fixed, Mrs. Kang, but healed. There's a difference. Fixing means making it like it never happened. Healing means learning to live with the scars." Ji-won looked at this young American woman who'd somehow wormed her way into their fortress, and for the first time she didn't see an intruder. She saw someone who genuinely cared. But the fragile peace that was building in the Kang household shattered one night when Min-jun came home injured. Naomi heard the commotion around midnight, raised voices in Korean, the sound of Min-jun cursing as Uniseo, and another guard helped him into the house. She rushed downstairs in her pajamas to find Min-jun in the foyer, his white shirt torn and blood-soaked, a deep gash across his ribs visible through the fabric. His face was bruised, his knuckles split, and he was radiating fury and pain in equal measure. Yunhyo saw Naomi on the stairs and immediately tried to redirect her. "Go back to your room. This doesn't concern you." But Naomi was already moving, her nursing training from volunteering at her brother's community center kicking in. She pushed past the guards and grabbed Min-jun's arm. "You need stitches. Where's your first aid kit?" Min-jun tried to pull away, his pride warring with his pain. "I have a doctor. He'll be here soon. Go back upstairs." But Naomi stood her ground, this tiny woman facing down a mafia boss and his armed guards without fear. "Your doctor isn't here now and you're bleeding all over your marble floor. Where is the first aid kit, or do I need to find it myself?" Something in her tone, the command mixed with genuine concern, made Min-jun's resistance crumble. "Study. Cabinet behind the desk." Naomi recruited one of the guards to help Min-jun to the study, then sent them all away over their protests. When it was just the two of them in that room, the security monitors casting flickering light across the walls, the atmosphere shifted into something intimate and dangerous. Naomi carefully cut away Min-jun's ruined shirt, her hand steady despite her racing heart. The wound was deep but clean, a knife slash that had missed anything vital but would definitely scar. As she cleaned the blood away with antiseptic that made Min-jun hiss through his teeth, she was hyper-aware of the intimacy of the moment. Her hands on his bare skin, his eyes watching her face, the scent of his cologne mixing with blood and antiseptic. "Why do you care?" Min-jun's voice was rough, confused. "This is not your job. You're here for Soo-ah." Naomi threaded a needle, grateful for the dim lighting that hid the flush in her cheeks. "Because Soo-ah needs her father alive. Because she's already lost one parent, and I won't stand by and watch her lose another if I can help it." She met his eyes as she started stitching, her hands surprisingly steady. "Hold still." Min-jun didn't even flinch as the needle pierced his skin, his pain tolerance clearly built from years of violence. But when Naomi's hand steadied herself against his chest, her palm flat over his heart, feeling it beat strong and fast beneath her touch, he couldn't hide his sharp intake of breath. Their eyes met again and the air between them became electric. Naomi could feel the heat of his skin, the strength in the muscles beneath her fingers. She was so close she could see gold flecks in his dark eyes, could feel his breath on her face. "You should be afraid of me," Min-jun said quietly. "Of what I am. What I do." Naomi tied off the last stitch with hands that trembled slightly. "Maybe I should be. But I'm not." Their hands touched as she reached for the bandage, fingers overlapping on the gauze and neither pulled away. The moment stretched, heavy with possibilities neither was brave enough to voice. The spell was broken by voices in the hallway. Naomi quickly finished bandaging his ribs and stepped back, putting professional distance between them even though her heart hammered in her chest. Min-jun stood slowly testing the stitches, then did something that shocked her. He caught her hand before she could leave. "Thank you," he said simply, and the sincerity in his voice made her breath catch. The next morning brought a new complication. Naomi woke to find unfamiliar cars in the drive and strange men in expensive suits throughout the house. A business meeting she learned, though the kind of business was obviously not legal. She was told to keep Soo-ah upstairs, away from the guests, which suited her fine. But curiosity got the better of her, and she watched from the second-floor landing as Min-jun greeted a man who made her skin crawl. Marcus Chen was biracial, Chinese and black, handsome in a dangerous way, with a smile that never reached his cold eyes. He moved through the Kang house like he owned it, touching expensive objects with casual disrespect, his voice carrying up the stairs. The meeting had moved to the formal living room, and though Naomi couldn't hear the details, she could see the tension in Min-jun's shoulders, the way Euniceo's hand stayed near his concealed weapon. Then Marcus Chen noticed her. His eyes traveled up the stairs and locked onto Naomi, and his smile widened into something predatory. Well. You didn't mention you'd upgraded the help, Kang. Where'd you find this beautiful sister? She's absolutely delicious." His tone made Naomi feel dirty, like she needed a shower. She started to retreat, but Chen's voice followed her. "Don't run away, sweetheart. I'm just appreciating the view. Maybe when you're done working for Kang you could work for me. I treat you real well." The temperature in the room dropped to Arctic levels. Min-jun moved so fast it was almost a blur, crossing the space between him and Chen, his voice lethal and quiet. "She's under my protection. You will not speak to her, look at her, or think about her. If you do, our business arrangement ends and what comes after won't be a negotiation. Do you understand me, Chen?" The threat was unmistakable, as was the fury in Min-jun's eyes. Chen raised his hands in mock surrender, still smiling that horrible smile. "Easy, friend. Just making conversation. Didn't realize she was special." But his eyes promised that this wasn't over, that he'd noted Min-jun's protective response and filed it away for future use. The meeting continued with renewed tension, but Naomi had fled back to Soo-ah's room, her heart pounding. She'd just seen Min-jun Kang defend her honor like she mattered, like she was more than just an employee, and the implications terrified her. That evening her phone rang. Grace's name flashed on the screen, and Naomi answered to her best friend's worried voice. "Girl, I haven't heard from you in 3 weeks. This place is a fortress, I can't even visit you. What the hell is going on?" Naomi looked around her luxurious suite, at the life she'd fallen into, and didn't know how to explain it. They talked for an hour, Naomi carefully editing out the dangerous details, but Grace had always been able to read her. Finally, her best friend's voice came through the phone, gentle but concerned. "Naomi, baby, you're catching feelings for him, aren't you? For this gangster." The words hung in the air, impossible to take back. Naomi's immediate instinct was denial. "No. Grace, no. It's not like that. It's just about Soo-ah. She's making progress, real progress, and I can't leave her now." But even as she said it, she knew it was a lie. She thought about Min-jun's eyes when Soo-ah had held her hand at dinner. She thought about the intimacy of stitching his wound, the feeling of his heartbeat under her palm. She thought about the fury in his voice defending her to Marcus Chen. And she knew that somewhere along the way she'd stopped seeing him as just a dangerous man and started seeing him as a person. A broken, complicated, traumatized person trying to protect his daughter the only way he knew how. "Oh honey," Grace's sigh was heavy with concern. "You know this can't end well. Men like that, they don't get happy endings. They get prison or graves. And anyone who loves them gets buried right alongside them." Naomi closed her eyes, leaning against the window of her suite, looking down at the compound below with its guards and cameras and walls. I know that, Grace. But I don't know how to stop it. If you want to see how this impossible love story unfolds between a woman trying to heal and a man who's forgotten how to feel, You need to subscribe right now because what happens next will change everything for Naomi, Min-jun, and little Soo-ah. Have you ever fallen for someone you knew was completely wrong for you but couldn't help how you felt? Drop your story in the comments because Naomi's about to learn that the most dangerous emotion in a mafia boss's world isn't hate, it's love. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday night, 6 weeks after Naomi first walked through the gates of the Kang estate. It was an ordinary evening by all accounts. She'd spent the day with Soo-ah doing their usual art therapy, painting side by side in comfortable silence that had become its own language between them. Soo-ah had laughed that day, actually laughed when Naomi accidentally got purple paint on her nose. It wasn't a big laugh, just a small giggle, but it was the first sound of joy Naomi had heard from the child, and it had filled her with so much hope she thought her heart might burst. Bedtime followed their established routine. Bath time with lavender bubbles that Naomi had introduced to help Soo-ah relax. Pajamas with cartoon bunnies that matched Haru, the stuffed rabbit that never left Soo-ah's side. A chapter from a picture book about a brave little mouse, even though Soo-ah never responded to the story. Then lights dimmed to just the glow of a night light shaped like a moon, and Naomi sitting on the edge of the bed, singing that same lullaby she sang every night, the one her mother had sung to her and Marcus when they were small. Naomi was halfway through the second verse, her voice soft in the quiet room when she stood to leave. She'd learned not to linger too long, not to push for goodnight hugs or words, just to be a consistent, safe presence and let Soo-ah come to her in her own time. She was almost to the door when she heard it. A voice, small and fragile and so quiet she almost thought she'd imagined it. Naomi, don't leave. Naomi froze, her hand on the doorknob, her entire body going still. 3 words. 3 words in slightly accented English from a child who hadn't spoken in 3 years. She turned slowly, afraid that any sudden movement might break the spell, and found Soo-ah sitting up in bed, clutching Haru, her dark eyes shining with tears in the moonlight. Please don't leave. Not like Mommy left. Please stay. The sob that tore from Naomi's throat was completely involuntary. She rushed back to the bed and pulled Soo-ah into her arms, this precious little girl who'd been locked in silence for so long, finally finding her voice again. Soo-ah clung to her, small arms wrapped tight around Naomi's neck and whispered again, "Don't leave me. I love you, Naomi." Naomi was crying so hard she could barely breathe, holding Soo-ah and rocking her gently, whispering promises into her hair. "I'm not leaving, sweetheart. I'm not going anywhere. I promise. I'm right here and I'm staying right here." They stayed like that for long minutes, Naomi not even realizing she was reaching for her phone until it was in her hand, finding Min-jun's number through blurred vision, typing with shaking fingers because he needed to know, he needed to hear this miracle. Min-jun was in a meeting 3 cities away, discussing territory agreements with an affiliated gang, when his phone buzzed. He normally would have ignored it, but Naomi never contacted him during his business hours unless it was an emergency. His heart stopped as he read her message. "Come home. No." Soo-ah spoke. He was on his feet before he'd consciously decided to move, barking orders to Unio to handle the meeting, already running for his car. The drive back should have taken 45 minutes. Min-jun made it in 23, breaking every traffic law in California, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tight his knuckles were white. He burst into his house like a storm, taking the stairs 3 at a time, and found Naomi sitting on Soo-ah's bed, the little girl curled in her lap, both of them looking up as he entered. Soo-ah's eyes, those eyes that had been so hollow for so long, were bright and alive and focused on him in a way they hadn't been since before her mother died. And then his daughter, his precious Soo-ah who he'd thought he'd lost forever, spoke to him. "Daddy, Naomi is staying. She promised. She's not leaving like Mommy." Soo-ah's voice was hoarse from disuse, small and uncertain, but it was the most beautiful sound Min-jun had ever heard. He crossed the room in 2 strides and dropped to his knees beside the bed, pulling both Soo-ah and Naomi into his arms, this man who never showed weakness, never let his guard down, completely undone by the sound of his daughter's voice. "My Soo-ah. My brave, beautiful girl." Min-jun's voice cracked, tears he hadn't shed in years streaming down his face. He pulled back just enough to cup Soo-ah's face in his hands, looking at her like he was seeing her for the first time. "I love you so much. So much. And yes, Naomi is staying. For as long as she wants. Forever if she'll have us." His eyes met Naomi's over his daughter's head, and the emotion in that look, the gratitude and wonder and something deeper that neither of them could name, made Naomi's breath catch. Soo-ah fell asleep eventually, exhausted from the emotional breakthrough, curled between them with Haru tucked under her chin and a small smile on her peaceful face. Naomi and Min-jun stayed on either side of her, neither willing to move, both watching her sleep like they were guarding something infinitely precious. The clock on Soo-ah's nightstand ticked past midnight, then 1 a.m., and still they sat there in the soft glow of the moon nightlight. Finally Min-jun spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I thought I'd lost her forever. After Min-hee died, after Soo-ah stopped speaking, stopped eating, stopped living, I thought she'd never come back to me. I hired the best child psychiatrist money could buy. I brought in specialists from Korea, from Switzerland, from everywhere. Nothing worked. She just kept slipping further and further away, and I was watching my daughter disappear, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. He reached across Soo-ah's sleeping form and took Naomi's hand. You gave her back to me. You gave me back my daughter. I don't have words for what that means. Naomi squeezed his hand, her own eyes filling with tears again. She gave herself back, Min-jun. She just needed someone patient enough to wait for her and safe enough to come back to. You gave her that safety. This house, these walls, they're not just a fortress. They're her sanctuary. You protected her body. I just helped protect her heart. Min-jun's thumb traced circles on her palm, an unconscious gesture of intimacy that sent shivers up her arm. Come with me, please. I need to talk to you, and I can't do it here where she might wake up and hear. They moved carefully, extracting themselves from the bed without waking Soo-ah, Min-jun setting up the baby monitor even though his daughter was 6 and had never needed one before tonight. Then he led Naomi through the quiet house, upstairs she'd never climbed, through a door that required a fingerprint scan, to a rooftop terrace she hadn't known existed. The view from up here was breathtaking. All of Los Angeles spread out below them like a carpet of stars, the city lights competing with the real stars above. The terrace had comfortable furniture and potted plants, clearly a space Min-jun came to when he needed to think, to be alone with his thoughts away from the security cameras that covered every other inch of his property. Min-jun walked to the edge, his hands gripping the railing, staring out at the city he'd fought to control. Naomi came to stand beside him, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body in the cool night air, but not quite touching. They stood in silence for a long moment, the sound of the city a distant hum below them, before Min-jun finally began to speak. My wife, Min-hee, she was chosen for me when I was 25. I just taken over the Baekho Syndicate from my father, just established myself as the leader, and my mother told me it was time to marry. Min-hee came from a powerful family, old Korean money with connections to the Yakuza in Japan. The marriage was strategic, a way to solidify alliances and expand our influence. His voice was flat, reciting facts like a history lesson. I agree because that's what sons do. We honor our parents. We put duty before desire. We do what's best for the family even when it costs us everything. He turned to face Naomi, and in the starlight she could see the pain etched in every line of his face. I loved her. I want you to understand that. She was kind and intelligent and she tried so hard to make our arranged marriage into something real. She deserved better than me, better than this life. But I wasn't in love with her, Naomi. I cared for her, I respected her, I would have protected her with my life. But I didn't love her the way a husband should love a wife. And she knew it. We both knew it, but we pretended because that's what you do in a marriage built on duty rather than passion. Min-jun's hands clenched on the railing. When Soo-ah was born, things got better between us. We had something to focus on besides our loveless marriage. We were good parents if not good partners. We built a life that looked perfect from the outside, all while feeling empty on the inside. And then, 3 years ago, my duty killed her. A rival faction, the Jade Tigers, they wanted to send me a message. They wanted to show me I wasn't untouchable, that no matter how many walls I built or how many guards I hired, they could still hurt me. His voice broke, raw emotion finally cracking through. They came during the day, bold as anything, 6 men with automatic weapons. They shot their way through the front gate, killed 2 of my guards before anyone could respond. Min-hee was in the garden with Soo-ah playing. Just playing with our daughter in the afternoon sun. She heard the gunshots and she ran, grabbing Soo-ah, trying to get back to the house. But they were faster. Tears streamed down Min-jun's face now unchecked. Min-hee pushed Soo-ah behind a fountain, covered her with her own body. The bullets, they tore through her. She died protecting our daughter while Soo-ah watched from underneath her mother's body, covered in her blood. By the time I got home from my meeting, Min-hee was dead and Soo-ah was catatonic, and it was all my fault. My duty, my arranged marriage, my business, all of it killed a good woman who deserved a man who could love her properly and keep her safe. Naomi felt like her heart was being ripped from her chest. She reached for Min-jun without thinking, pulling him into her arms, and he collapsed against her, this powerful, dangerous man breaking completely in her embrace. He sobbed into her shoulder, 3 years of grief and guilt pouring out of him, and Naomi held him through all of it, her own tears falling into his hair. When his sobs finally quieted to shuddering breaths, Naomi pulled back just enough to cup his face in her hands, making him look at her. Listen to me, Min-jun Kang. Your wife's death was not your fault. The men who pulled those triggers, they're responsible. The violence of your world, that's responsible. But you loved her as much as you were capable of loving her, and you gave her a daughter she adored, and in her final moments she chose to save that daughter. You didn't kill her. You gave her something worth dying for. Min-jun's hands came up to cover hers, pressing her palms against his face like he was trying to absorb her certainty into his soul. How can you not hate me? How can you look at what I am, what I do, the blood on my hands, and not run screaming? Naomi smiled through her tears. Because I understand what it's like to carry guilt for something you couldn't control. Can I tell you about my brother? Really tell you, not just the sanitized version? Min-jun nodded, pulling her to the outdoor sofa, keeping her hand in his like he was afraid she'd disappear if he let go. Naomi took a deep breath and opened the wound she usually kept carefully bandaged. Marcus was 13 when he saw his best friend get shot in a drive-by. Wrong place, wrong colors, wrong time. Just a kid walking home from basketball practice who happened to be wearing a red shirt on a street claimed by a gang that wore blue. Marcus watched his friend die on the sidewalk, and something in him broke that day. Naomi stared out at the city lights, seeing the past instead of the present. I was 19, home from college for the summer, studying psychology because I wanted to help kids like Marcus. I thought I was so smart, so capable. I could see the signs of trauma, the way he was withdrawing, the nightmares, the panic attacks. I did everything the textbooks said. Art therapy, talk therapy, got him into counseling. And for a while it seemed to work. He was healing, or so I thought. But trauma doesn't heal in straight lines. It comes in waves, and sometimes the undertow pulls you under when you think you've reached the shore. Her voice cracked, but she pushed through. When Marcus was 16, he started hanging out with the wrong crowd. Kids from the neighborhood who promised protection, who made him feel safe in a world that had shown him how quickly safety could be shattered. I tried to stop him. I tried everything. I reported the gang to the police, but Marcus wouldn't testify, wouldn't name names. I begged him to leave LA, to come live with me in whatever city I ended up in after graduation. But he was 16 and angry and scared, and he thought the only way to never be a victim again was to become someone people feared. Naomi's tears fell freely now, her hands shaking in Min-jun's grip. He'd been in the gang for 6 months when it happened. A retaliation hit, tit-for-tat violence that has no beginning and no end. Marcus was on a corner with his crew when a car drove by and opened fire. He took 3 bullets, one to the chest, one to the stomach, one to the leg. I got the call at my dorm room. By the time I got to the hospital, he was in surgery. By the time he got out of surgery, he was in a coma. By the time he woke up, infection had set in. I held his hand while he died, watched him slip away, and I couldn't do a damn thing to save him. She turned to look at Min-jun, her eyes blazing with old pain and fresh tears. I became a psychologist to save kids like him. Like Soo-ah. Kids who'd seen too much violence, who were drowning in trauma, who needed someone to throw them a lifeline before they went under. I was good at it, Min-jun. Really good. I saved a lot of kids. But there were so many more I couldn't save. Every child who aged out of the system into homelessness, every kid who ended up in jail or dead or lost to addiction, they all had Marcus's face. And eventually I couldn't carry that weight anymore. I broke under it. I quit, walked away, told myself I was done trying to save people. And then I met Soo-ah. Min-jun pulled her into his arms, and they held each other, 2 broken people who'd both failed to save the people they loved, both carrying guilt that had no rational basis but felt real nonetheless. You saved her, Min-jun whispered into her hair. You saved my daughter. Maybe that doesn't erase Marcus, but it means something. It has to mean something. Naomi pulled back to look at him, and the distance between their faces was suddenly very small. She could see every detail of his features in the starlight, the strong line of his jaw, the intensity in his dark eyes, the slight part of his lips as his breath quickened. It means everything, she whispered. She means everything. You both do. The kiss happened like gravity, inevitable and irresistible. Min-jun's hand came up to cup the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her natural curls, and Naomi's hands gripped his shirt, pulling him closer. When their lips met, it was desperate and passionate and completely wrong and absolutely right all at the same time. 3 years of loneliness poured out of Min-jun, 6 weeks of building tension exploded between them, and neither of them could stop it even though they both knew they should. The kiss deepened, became something hungry and needful, weeks of denying their attraction finally given permission to exist. Min-jun's other hand came to rest on Naomi's waist, pulling her body against his, and she made a sound low in her throat that made him groan in response. They kissed like they were drowning and each other's breath was the only air, like the world was ending and this moment was all they had left, like every rule and boundary and reason they shouldn't be doing this didn't matter compared to the fact that they needed each other right now. When they finally broke apart, both gasping for breath, foreheads pressed together, Naomi whispered, "This is wrong. This is so wrong. You're my employer. You're a criminal. I should not be doing this." Min-jun's thumb traced her bottom lip, his eyes dark with desire. I know it's wrong. You should run. You should leave this house and never look back. But God help me, Naomi, I can't let you go. I can't be near you and not want you. I can't watch you with my daughter and not imagine you with me. Tell me to stop. Tell me you don't feel this too." Naomi kissed him again, softer this time but no less intense. "I can't. Because I do feel it. I feel it so much it terrifies me." They kissed again and again, losing themselves in each other under the stars, two people who'd spent so long being strong and controlled and responsible finally letting themselves be weak and reckless and human. They didn't hear the rooftop door open. Didn't notice they had an audience until Yuneo cleared his throat loudly, the sound cutting through their passion like a knife. Min-jun and Naomi sprang apart, both flushed and disheveled, to find Min-jun's right-hand man and oldest friend standing in the doorway, his expression disapproving and concerned in equal measure. Yuneseo's eyes moved from Min-jun to Naomi and back again, taking in their swollen lips, their messy clothing, the way they were still reaching for each other even as they separated. He spoke in Korean, his voice tight with emotion, but Naomi had learned enough to catch the gist. He was telling Min-jun this was a mistake, that she was an outsider, that mixing business with personal feelings always ended in blood. Min-jun responded in English, probably for Naomi's benefit, his voice firm. "That's enough, Yuneseo. What happens between Miss Carter and myself is not your concern." But Yuneo wasn't backing down, switching to English himself. "It is my concern when your judgment is compromised, Hyungnim. When your attention is divided. When you make yourself vulnerable." He looked at Naomi, and there was no anger in his expression, just worry. "I don't doubt your feelings are real, Miss Carter. I don't even doubt you're good for Soo-ah. But this world, our world, it doesn't allow for love. It punishes it. Uses it as a weapon. If our enemies discover that you matter to him, they will hurt you to hurt him. They will use you and that little girl as leverage and people will die. Probably including you." Naomi felt ice run through her veins at his words, the passion of moments before cooling in the face of harsh reality. But before she could respond, Min-jun stepped between them, his body language protective. "Then we'll be careful. Discreet. No one will know." Yuneseo shook his head sadly. "You think you can hide this? The way you look at her? The way you just ran across 3 cities because she sent a text? People already suspect, Hyungnim. And suspicion is enough in our world." The moment was broken. The spell was shattered. Naomi mumbled something about needing to check on Soo-ah and fled the rooftop, her heart pounding and her mind racing. She'd just kissed a mafia boss. She'd just fallen for a man who lived in a world of violence and danger. And according to his most trusted advisor, she'd just painted a target on her own back. What the hell had she done? But over the next 2 weeks, despite Yuneseo's warnings, despite every rational thought screaming at them to stop, Naomi and Min-jun couldn't stay away from each other. Their relationship developed in stolen moments, hidden in the spaces between their real lives. Early mornings when the house was still asleep, they'd meet in his study, ostensibly to discuss Soo-ah's progress but really just to be near each other. Late nights after Soo-ah was in bed, Min-jun would come to Naomi's suite, and they'd talk for hours about everything and nothing, learning each other in ways that had nothing to do with their roles as employer and employee. Naomi tried to teach Min-jun how to be vulnerable, how to let his guard down, at least with her. "Power isn't just control," she told him one night as they sat on her private balcony, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. "Real power is trust. It's letting someone see your weaknesses and believing they won't exploit them. It's being strong enough to admit when you're not strong." Min-jun listened, really listened, in a way he probably hadn't listened to anyone in years. "I've spent my entire adult life believing that showing weakness means dying. In my world, vulnerability is a death sentence." Naomi turned to look up at him, her hand on his cheek. "I'm not asking you to be vulnerable with your enemies. I'm asking you to be vulnerable with me. Let me see the man under the mask. Let me know the real Min-jun Kang, not just the feared leader of the Baekho Syndicate." And slowly, carefully he did. He told her about growing up in Busan, about following his father into a life he never chose but couldn't escape. He told her about his first kill at 18, how it haunted him for years until he learned to turn off that part of himself that felt remorse. He showed her the scars on his body, each one a story of violence survived, and let her trace them with gentle fingers. But Min-jun also made sure Naomi understood exactly who she was falling for. I'm not good, Naomi. Don't romanticize what I do or who I am. I've killed people. Not in self-defense, not accidentally, but deliberately. I've ordered deaths. I've hurt people who crossed me. I run drugs through this city. I control illegal gambling, prostitution, protection rackets. The money that pays your salary comes from human suffering. His eyes were hard when he said it, daring her to flinch away. I'm showing you this so you can't say you didn't know. So you can't pretend I'm some misunderstood anti-hero. I'm a criminal and I'm very good at it. Naomi didn't flinch. I know what you are. I'm not blind or naive. But I also know you're trying to protect your daughter. I know you pay your people well and don't tolerate sexual violence in your organization. I know you have rules, twisted as they might be. You're not just a monster, Min-jun. Monsters don't cry over their daughters. Monsters don't feel guilt. You're a man who's done terrible things and you'll probably do more terrible things, and I'm choosing to see all of that and care about you anyway. Their relationship existed in this strange liminal space, hidden from the world but increasingly obvious to anyone who looked closely. Soo-ah definitely noticed. She started drawing new pictures, bright happy ones instead of dark traumatic ones. In her childish artwork, 3 figures appeared over and over, a tall man, a woman with curly hair and a little girl, always together, always holding hands, always smiling. She drew them as a family, and the hope in those pictures was almost painful to see. One morning, Soo-ah presented Naomi with a drawing over breakfast, her voice still quiet but growing stronger every day. Look, Naomi. Just you, me and Daddy. We're at the beach. Daddy's never taken me to the beach because he says it's not safe, but maybe someday we can go together. As a family. She looked up with those big hopeful eyes, and Naomi felt her heart crack and mend simultaneously. This child who'd been so broken was healing, was hoping, was imagining a future beyond these walls. And she was imagining that future with Naomi in it. But not everyone was thrilled about Soo-ah's progress or the obvious connection developing between Naomi and Min-jun. Detective James Morrison had been watching Naomi more closely than she realized. He'd made a habit of driving past the Kang estate during his off hours, noting when Naomi's car was there, which was basically always now since she'd essentially moved in full-time. He'd seen the way the security had changed around her, how she was now included in the protective protocols usually reserved for family. And it worried him sick. One afternoon, when Naomi finally left the compound for a scheduled dentist appointment, Morrison was waiting. He followed her car to a coffee shop near her dentist's office and intercepted her before she could get back in her vehicle. We need to talk. Now. His tone left no room for argument. Naomi's heart sank, but she followed him to his unmarked police car, sliding into the passenger seat with a sense of dread. Morrison didn't waste time on pleasantries. What the hell are you doing, Naomi? I've been watching you watching that house and I can see what's happening. You're not just working there anymore. You're living there. You're part of his life. Jesus Christ, are you sleeping with him? Naomi's face flushed. That's none of your business, James. Morrison's laugh was harsh. It absolutely is my business when the little sister of my dead partner is shacking up with a gangster. Your brother died because of men like Min-jun Kang. Marcus got pulled into gang life because men like Kang make violence look like power, make crime look like success. And now you're what? Playing house with one of them? Have you forgotten what they took from us? Naomi felt anger rise in her chest, hot and defensive. Min-jun is not the same as the men who killed Marcus. He's complicated. He's trying to protect his daughter. He's not some mindless thug. Morrison's expression was pained, like he was watching someone he loved walk into traffic. They never are, Naomi. That's how they hook you. They show you their humanity, their wounded hearts, their protective instincts. And you fall for it because you're a good person who sees the best in people. But that doesn't change what they do. It doesn't change the bodies they leave behind. He grabbed her hand, forcing her to look at him. I've been investigating Min-jun Kang for 3 years. I know about the territorial wars he's won. I know about the people who've disappeared after crossing him. Last year, a mid-level dealer tried to skim product from one of Kang's operations. They found what was left of him in a dumpster behind a restaurant in Koreatown. The medical examiner said he'd been tortured before he died. That's who you're falling in love with, Naomi? A man who orders torture. Naomi pulled her hand away, her voice shaking. You don't know him like I do. You don't see what I see. Morrison's expression softened into something like pity. You're right. I don't see what you see. I see clearly. And what I see is that you're going to end up dead or destroyed. They never are simple, Naomi. These men, they're never just monsters or just misunderstood souls. But that complexity doesn't save the people who love them. It just makes the tragedy more poetic when you're burying someone you love. Naomi left that conversation shaken, Morrison's words echoing in her head as she drove back to the Kang estate. She sat in her car in the driveway for 20 minutes, watching the armed guards patrol, seeing the security cameras track her vehicle, understanding with new clarity just how deep she'd fallen into a world she didn't fully understand. She should leave. She knew she should leave. But when she walked into the house and Soo-ah ran to hug her, shouting, "Naomi's home," with pure joy, and Min-jun appeared at the top of the stairs with that small smile he saved just for her, Naomi knew she wasn't going anywhere. What neither Naomi nor Min-jun knew was that their secret relationship wasn't as secret as they thought. Marcus Chin, the rival gang leader who'd made inappropriate comments about Naomi during that business meeting, had people everywhere. One of Min-jun's household staff, a man who cleaned the security office and had access to the monitors, was on Chen's payroll. He'd been feeding information to Chen for months, waiting for something valuable enough to make his betrayal worthwhile. When he saw footage of Min-jun and Naomi kissing on the rooftop, he knew he'd struck gold. He copied the files, encrypted them, and sent them to Chen with a simple message: "The dragon has found his weakness." Chen watched the footage 3 times, his smile growing wider with each viewing. This was it. This was the leverage he needed. Min-jun Kang, the untouchable leader of the Baekho Syndicate, had finally made a mistake. He'd fallen in love. Chen called a meeting with his top lieutenants, playing the footage on a large screen while they discussed strategy. "Love makes even dragons weak," Chen said, freezing the image on Min-jun and Naomi's kiss. "He's built his entire empire on being cold, calculating, unemotional. He makes decisions based on logic, never lets personal feelings interfere with business. But look at him now. Look at how he touches her. Look at that expression. The great Min-jun Kang is in love with his daughter's nanny. A civilian. An outsider. Someone with no protection, no power, no defenses." One of his lieutenants, a scarred man named Tommy Wu, leaned forward. "So we take her. Use her to leverage the territory negotiations in our favor. Kang's been blocking our expansion into the harbor district for 2 years. He gives us that, we give her back unharmed." Chen's smile was predatory. "Oh, we'll take her. But not for territory. For everything. The entire Baekho Syndicate. We're going to use his love against him, break him completely, and absorb his empire while he's on his knees begging for her life." The plan was set in motion. Chen's people began surveilling Naomi's movements, learning her routines, identifying the best moment to strike. They noted that she occasionally left the compound for appointments, always with a security detail, but sometimes that detail was only 1 or 2 guards. Manageable numbers. They just needed to wait for the right opportunity, and in this business, opportunities always came to those patient enough to wait. Back at the Kang estate, unaware of the danger closing in around them, Naomi and Min-jun continued to steal their moments together, building something fragile and beautiful in the cracks between their real lives. They were falling deeper in love with every conversation, every kiss, every vulnerability shared. Min-jun was learning to feel again, to hope again, to believe that maybe duty and power weren't the only things that mattered. Naomi was learning that sometimes the most broken people are capable of the most beautiful growth, that redemption isn't about erasing the past but building a different future. Neither of them realized they were living on borrowed time, that their love story was about to become a tragedy, that Marcus Chen was watching and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And when that moment came, it would test everything they'd built, everything they believed about each other, and whether love could survive in a world built on violence. If you want to find out what happens when Marcus Chen makes his move and whether love can survive in the brutal world of organized crime, you absolutely need to subscribe right now, because this story is about to take a dark and devastating turn that will leave you on the edge of your seat. Have you ever loved someone so much that you knew it might destroy you but you couldn't walk away? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because Naomi and Min-jun are about to learn that in their world, love isn't just dangerous, it's deadly. 23 minutes into our story and everything that Min-jun has carefully built, every wall, every protection, every calculated move, is about to crumble like sand through desperate fingers. It's an ordinary Tuesday morning. Naomi has been living in the compound for months now, and she's established routines that make the fortress feel almost normal. Today she needs groceries. Fresh vegetables for Soo-ah's favorite stew, the special bread the little girl loves, ingredients for the cookies they bake together every Thursday. Simple, domestic, beautiful things that have no place in a crime lord's world. Min-jun doesn't want her to go. There's an instinct screaming in his gut, that primal warning that's kept him alive through a dozen gang wars and countless assassination attempts. But Naomi smiles at him with those warm eyes and says she'll be back in an hour. What can he say? That he's afraid? That the thought of her outside these walls makes his chest constrict? He's Min-jun Park. He doesn't admit fear. So he watches her leave, Ji-won accompanying her with 2 guards. Standard protocol. Safe enough. Except Chin has been patient. Chin has been watching. And Chin knows that the way to destroy a man isn't to attack his power, it's to attack his heart. The abduction happens in broad daylight, 3 blocks from the compound. Chin's men are professionals, swift, brutal, efficient. They disable the guards in seconds, grab Ji-won's phone before she can call for help, and throw Naomi into a black van that disappears into Seoul's morning traffic like smoke. But Chin makes one critical mistake. One tiny, devastating error that will ultimately seal his fate. Little Soo-ah is at the compound's front window, waiting for Naomi to return. She sees everything. The van. The struggle. Naomi's frightened face in the window before the vehicle speeds away. And just like that, the 7-year-old girl who was finally learning to speak, who was finally starting to heal, who was beginning to laugh again, she shatters. When Ji-won stumbles back to the compound 15 minutes later, bleeding from a head wound, she finds Soo-ah sitting on the floor, rocking back and forth, completely silent. Not crying. Not screaming. Just gone. Retreated back into that dark place where she hid after her mother died. The phone call comes an hour later. Chen's voice is smooth, almost pleasant, like he's discussing a business merger over expensive whiskey. In a way he is. Min-jun. I have something of yours. Someone I should say. Quite lovely, your American nanny. Such soft skin. Such frightened eyes. Min-jun's hand grips the phone so hard the screen cracks. Around him his entire inner circle has gathered, Uniseo, Ji-won, his top lieutenants. They've never seen him like this. They've seen him angry, calculating, cold. But this? This is fury incarnate. This is a man watching his world burn. If you touch her, Min-jun begins, his voice deadly quiet. You'll what? Chin interrupts, laughing. Start a war? We're already at war, Park. But I'm a reasonable man. I'm offering you peace. Merge your syndicate with mine. Give me control of your territory, your operations, your networks. Do this, and your pretty little nanny goes home with all her fingers intact. The line goes dead. For a long moment, Min-jun stands frozen. Then, with a roar that seems to come from the depths of his soul, he sweeps everything off his desk. Papers, laptop, expensive scotch. It all crashes to the floor. His men step back. Even Uniseo, who's known him for 15 years, looks uncertain. Mobilize everyone, Min-jun orders, his voice like gravel. Every soldier, every asset, every contact. I want Chen's location within the hour. Min-jun, Uniseo says carefully, if we move against Chen directly, the other syndicates will see it as. I don't care what they see. The outburst silences the room. Min-jun's chest heaves, his carefully maintained composure finally, completely shattered. He took her. He took Naomi. I will burn his empire to ash. I will scatter those ashes in the sea. And then I'll piss on the memory of his name. Uniseo studies his oldest friend with something like wonder and horror. This is why we don't love Min-jun. This is exactly why. It makes us vulnerable. It gives our enemies ammunition. Look at you, you're ready to sacrifice everything for one woman. Min-jun turns to face her, and for the first time in their long partnership, Uniseo sees something in his eyes that actually frightens her. Not rage. Not violence. But absolute, unwavering certainty. Then I'll be vulnerable, he says quietly. I've spent 10 years being invulnerable. Being cold. Being empty. And I lost my wife anyway. I nearly lost my daughter to silence and grief. I won't lose another person I love. Not while I still draw breath. Ji-won, still pressing a cloth to her bleeding head, speaks up from the corner. Her voice is rough with emotion. I was wrong about her, Min-jun. I thought she was a threat, a weakness, a pretty distraction. But she's family. She woke Soo-ah up. She made this house a home. So whatever you need, whatever it takes, bring our Naomi home. The search begins immediately. Every informant, every contact, every person who owes Min-jun a favor gets a call. But Chin is smart. He's hidden Naomi somewhere off the grid, somewhere none of Min-jun's usual sources can penetrate. Hours pass. Valuable, agonizing hours. Min-jun hasn't eaten, hasn't slept. He's calling in favors he's saved for years, burning through goodwill like it's paper. And still, nothing. Soo-ah remains catatonic, staring at nothing. Min-jun sits with her for 20 minutes, holding her small hand, whispering promises he's not sure he can keep. "I'll bring her back, baby. I swear to you. Naomi's coming home." The little girl doesn't respond. Doesn't even blink. Then, at 11:47 p.m., Min-jun's encrypted phone buzzes with a message from an unknown number. It's an address. A warehouse in the industrial district. And a single sentence: "If you want to save her, you'll need help." He's waiting. The number belongs to Yunesio's personal phone. When Min-jun confronts her, she doesn't apologize. "You needed a way in. I gave it to you. Morrison has resources we don't. Connections in places we can't reach. You contacted the FBI agent who's been trying to arrest me for 3 years? I contacted the man who loves Naomi almost as much as you do." Yunesio's expression is unreadable. He'll help. Because unlike us, he actually believes in saving innocent people. She's right. 30 minutes later, Min-jun finds himself in the most surreal meeting of his life. Agent Morrison, the straight-laced federal investigator who's been building a case against him since 2022, sits across from him in a neutral parking garage. The tension is thick enough to choke on. Morrison speaks first. "I'm doing this for her. Not for you. After this, after we bring Naomi home, you let her go. You let her walk away from this world and live a normal life." Min-jun's jaw clenches. "That's her choice. Not yours. Not mine. Her choice." Morrison laughs bitterly. "What choice does she have when you've trapped her in your compound, surrounded her with violence, made her responsible for your daughter's well-being? That's not choice, Park. That's coercion. You think I forced her to care about Soo-ah? Forced her to..." Min-jun stops himself, but the words hang in the air anyway. "Forced her to love me." Morrison's expression softens, just slightly. "I think you gave her an impossible situation. But right now none of that matters. Right now she's in danger and we both want her safe. So let's table our philosophical differences and go get her." The plan comes together quickly. Morrison has tactical support, a small team of agents he trusts, ones willing to bend the rules for this operation. Min-jun has firepower and local knowledge. Together they might actually stand a chance. As they prepare to move out, Morrison grabs Min-jun's arm. "If she dies because of your world, because of the choices you made that pulled her into this mess, I'll spend the rest of my career making sure you pay for it." Min-jun meets his eyes without flinching. "If she dies, you won't need to. I'll do it myself." 25 minutes into our story and we've reached the moment everything changes. The warehouse sits in Seoul's forgotten industrial wasteland, a graveyard of rust and broken dreams where legitimate business died decades ago. It's the perfect location for Chen's endgame. Isolated, defensible, far from civilian eyes. Min-jun's convoy approaches from the east. Morrison's team from the west. The synchronization is perfect, military precise. But as they breach the perimeter, they realize Chen was expecting them. The inside of the warehouse is a killing floor. Open space with minimal cover, elevated positions for Chen's snipers, and in the center, tied to a chair under a single spotlight, is Naomi. She's alive. Bruised, exhausted, terrified, but alive. When she sees Min-jun emerge from the shadows, her eyes fill with tears, relief and fear mixed together in equal measure. Chen steps out from behind her, one hand wrapped in her hair, the other holding a pistol pressed against her temple. He's dressed immaculately despite the surroundings, smiling like this is all an elaborate game he's already won. Min-jun Park. His voice echoes in the cavernous space. "Right on time. And you brought friends? How American of you." Min-jun raises his hands slowly, weapon lowered but not dropped. Around him, his men fan out, mirroring Chen's forces in a deadly symmetry. Morrison's team holds position at the west entrance, professional and still. "Let her go, Chen. This is between us." "Between us?" Chen laughs, pulling Naomi's head back sharply. She gasps but doesn't cry out. "No, my friend. This stopped being between us the moment you chose pussy over power. Tell me, is she really worth more than territory? More than respect? More than the empire we could have built together?" The question hangs in the air. Everyone in that warehouse, every gangster, every federal agent, every person who's chosen violence as their profession, they all want to know the answer. Min-jun looks at Naomi. Really looks at her. Sees the woman who makes his daughter laugh. The woman who brings light into his darkness. The woman who somehow looked at a monster and saw a man worth saving. He drops his weapon. The clatter of metal on concrete sounds like thunder. Yes. The warehouse erupts in murmurs. Chen's smile widens. Then you're weaker than I thought. But here's what Chen doesn't know. Here's what no one in that room except Morrison suspected. Naomi isn't helpless. Remember, she's a woman who traveled alone to a foreign country. Who took a job with a known crime boss. Who walked into danger with her eyes wide open. Did anyone really think she was naive enough to do all that without preparation? The self-defense training started in college. Continued through her years teaching abroad. Intensified when she realized the kind of world she was entering. She's no master fighter, no action hero. But she knows enough. Just enough. As Chen monologues about Min-jun's weakness, about how love makes men stupid, Naomi acts. She throws her head back violently, cracking into Chen's nose. In his moment of shocked pain, she twists in the chair, breaking his grip. The gun goes off, a wild shot that grazes her shoulder but misses anything vital. And in that heartbeat of chaos, Min-jun moves. Morrison's team moves. The warehouse becomes a war zone. Gunfire. Shouting. The acrid smell of cordite and fear. Chen's men weren't expecting actual resistance. They thought their boss had the upper hand. Morrison's agents are trained professionals. Min-jun's soldiers are loyal unto death. Chen runs. Of course he runs. Men like him always do when the odds shift. He disappears into the warehouse's back corridors, his empire crumbling behind him. But no one's chasing him. Because Min-jun has reached Naomi. She's collapsed on the floor, clutching her bleeding shoulder, and when he drops beside her, gathering her into his arms, she's shaking uncontrollably. The adrenaline is wearing off, the reality of what just happened crashing down. Stay with me, Min-jun whispers, pressing his hand against her wound to slow the bleeding. His voice cracks. Please, Naomi. Stay with me. Through tears and pain, she manages a weak smile. I'm not going anywhere, you idiot. It's just a graze. You fought back. He can't finish the sentence. Can't process the mixture of pride and terror coursing through him. You dropped your gun for me, she says softly. I had to do something. Morrison appears above them, already calling for medical support. The warehouse is secure, Chen's men surrendering or fleeing. It's over. They won. But the cost is written in blood on Naomi's shoulder and in the haunted look in Min-jun's eyes. The ride back to the compound is silent. Naomi's been treated by Morrison's medic. The bullet barely grazed her, she'll be fine in a week. But Min-jun holds her like she's made of glass, like she might disappear if he loosens his grip even slightly. When they pull through the compound gates at 2:47 a.m., there's a small figure waiting in the doorway. Soo-ah. The little girl has been standing there for hours, Ji-won tells them later. Just standing, watching, waiting. Not speaking. Barely breathing. As if her entire world was on pause until Naomi came home. When Naomi steps out of the car, wincing at her injured shoulder, Soo-ah breaks into a run. The 7-year-old crashes into Naomi's legs, sobbing with the force of a dam breaking. Great, heaving sobs that shake her entire small body. And then, in a voice rough from hours of silence, Soo-ah speaks. I love you. I love you. I love you. The same 3 words over and over like a prayer. Like a promise. Like the most important thing in the world. It's the first time Soo-ah has said those words to anyone since her mother died. The first time she's allowed herself to love again, to risk that kind of loss again. Naomi sinks to her knees despite the pain, wrapping her good arm around the child, and they cry together on the doorstep of a crime lord's fortress while dangerous men look away and pretend they're not getting emotional too. Min-jun stands apart, watching his daughter finally fully come back to life, and realizes that Naomi didn't just save them. She rebuilt them. 27 minutes in, and we need to talk about what happens after the fairy tale rescue. Because this isn't a fairy tale. This is the real world, where trauma has consequences and love isn't always enough. A week passes. Naomi heals physically, the shoulder wound is minor, already starting to scar. But the psychological aftermath? That takes longer. She has nightmares. Wakes up gasping, convinced she's still in that chair with a gun to her head. Min-jun is always there, holding her, reminding her she's safe. But Min-jun is struggling with something else entirely. Guilt. The crushing, suffocating realization that his world almost killed her. That his choices, his enemies, his life, they nearly took away the best thing that's happened to him in a decade. He watches her playing with Soo-ah in the garden, watches her flinch at loud noises, watches the way she sometimes stares into space with haunted eyes, and he makes a decision. She deserves better. On the 8th day after the rescue, Min-jun calls Naomi to his office. There's an envelope on his desk. Thick, expensive paper. Inside, a cashier's check and documents. What's this? Naomi asks, confused. Min-jun can't look at her. Your freedom. There's enough money there to start over anywhere in the world. The documents include a new identity if you want it, recommendations for jobs, contacts in safe cities. Everything you need to walk away and build a normal life. The silence that follows is deafening. You're sending me away? I'm giving you a choice you should have had from the beginning. Now he does look at her, and his eyes are raw with emotion. You've done enough, Naomi. More than enough. You brought my daughter back from the edge. You made this cold house feel like a home. But I can't. I won't keep you in a world that almost got you killed. Naomi stares at the envelope like it's a snake. Then, with deliberate calm, she picks it up and tears it in half. Then in quarters. Then into pieces so small they flutter to the floor like snow. No. Naomi. You don't get to decide what I deserve, Min-jun. You don't get to make this choice for me. You don't understand what you're saying. My world will always be dangerous. Always. There will always be another Chin, another threat, another. I know who you are. The outburst stops him cold. Naomi's hands are shaking, but her voice is steady. I know exactly who you are. All of it. The blood on your hands. The violence you've ordered. The empire built on fear and force. I'm not naive. I'm not some innocent who wandered in here by accident. She steps closer, forcing him to meet her eyes. But I also know the man who holds his daughter during nightmares. The man who learns her favorite songs so he can hum them when she can't sleep. The man who's reading parenting books in secret because he's terrified of getting it wrong. The man who's learning to feel again after a decade of numbness. That doesn't change what I am, Min-jun says quietly. What I've done. No, it doesn't. And I'm not asking you to be someone else. I'm telling you that I see all of you, the darkness and the light, and I'm not leaving. Naomi. His voice breaks on her name. My world will always be dangerous, she quotes his own words back at him. Then we make it safer. Together. For her. For Soo-ah. We make choices that protect her, that give her a chance at something better than we had. That's how we move forward. Before Min-jun can respond, small footsteps sound in the hallway. Soo-ah appears in the doorway, clutching her worn rabbit toy. She's been doing better, talking more, smiling again. But she's also developed a sixth sense for tension, a hyper-awareness born from trauma. Naomi, stay, the little girl says simply. She walks to Naomi and takes her hand. Then she looks at her father with those huge dark eyes that see too much. Be my family. Both of you. Be my family. And what can Min-jun say to that? How can he argue with his daughter's first real wish since her mother died? He looks at these two people, this woman and this child, who somehow found each other in the darkness and decided to be each other's light. And he realizes that maybe, just maybe, he's not the one who gets to decide what's best for everyone else. Maybe they get to choose too. Okay, he whispers. Okay. Now, I need you to think about something. Remember how our story opened. 28.5 minutes ago, we started with a scene of violence and blood. Min-jun standing over bodies while Naomi cried. The sense of something ending. Let me tell you what really happened. That opening scene? It wasn't the end of their story. It was Chin's final revenge attempt. 3 weeks after the warehouse rescue, Chin makes one last desperate move. His empire is destroyed, his allies have abandoned him, he's got nothing left to lose. So he sends a hit squad to the compound. 5 professional killers with one job. Murder Min-jun Park and anyone he loves. They breach the walls at 3 a.m. They're good, silent, deadly, coordinated. But they make one critical mistake. They assume Min-jun has grown soft, that love has made him weak. They're very wrong. The attack is brutal and brief. Min-jun moves through his own home like a ghost, like the killer he's always been, protecting the 2 people who've become his entire world. By the time backup arrives, it's over. The blood pooling on the marble floor? It's the attackers. Every single one. Min-jun stands there, breathing hard, covered in other people's blood, and realizes that Naomi and Soo-ah are both awake, both watching from the doorway. Soo-ah is scared but okay, Ji-won got her to safety immediately. But Naomi? Naomi is crying. Great, heaving sobs that shake her whole body. And Min-jun thinks in that moment that this is it. This is when she finally realizes what he is. This is when she leaves, when she takes the money and runs, when she chooses safety over this blood-soaked love. I can't do this anymore, Naomi says through her tears. Min-jun's heart breaks. I understand. No, you don't. She crosses to him, stepping over bodies without hesitation, and grabs his face with both hands. I can't do this anymore. I can't keep pretending this is just a job. That I'm just the nanny. That I'm here because you pay me. What are you saying? I'm saying I love you, you idiot. I love you and it terrifies me and I can't pretend otherwise anymore. The tears? They're relief. Relief that he's alive. Relief that they're all safe. Relief that she doesn't have to hide her feelings anymore. When Min-jun said, "Then you've made your choice," he didn't mean goodbye. He meant welcome home. Welcome to the family. Welcome to this beautiful, broken, dangerous thing they're building together. 6 months later. The compound is different now. Oh, it's still fortress-like. You don't undo decades of paranoia overnight. But there are changes. Small ones at first, then larger. Flowers in the garden. Not the strategic landscaping designed for security, but actual flower beds that Soo-ah helps plant. There's laughter in the halls. Music playing during dinner. The walls are still high but somehow they feel less like a prison. Soo-ah is thriving. At 8 years old, she's enrolled in school, a private institution with excellent security but still, school. She has friends. She talks constantly, making up for years of silence with endless questions and observations. She's in therapy, processing her trauma properly, learning healthy coping mechanisms. And she's still the boss of the household, by the way. That hasn't changed. She's assigned herself the role of ensuring Naomi and her father actually communicate like adults instead of brooding dramatically at each other. In the kitchen, something miraculous is happening. Ji-won is teaching Naomi to cook Korean dishes. The same Ji-won who wanted Naomi gone, who saw her as a threat, who made her life difficult for months. They're bonding over kimchi recipes and gossiping about Min-jun's terrible dance moves. More gochugaru, Ji-won instructs, watching critically as Naomi prepares marinade. You're too cautious. Korean food requires courage. Everything in this house requires courage, Naomi mutters, but she's smiling. Ji-won's expression softens. You have it. More than I gave you credit for. I'm sorry it took me so long to see that. You were protecting him. Protecting her. I understand. Still. You're family now. I should have recognized that sooner. Family. The word that means everything. Agent Morrison visits regularly now too, which is perhaps the strangest development of all. He and Min-jun have developed a cautious friendship built on mutual respect and shared love for Naomi. Morrison still doesn't approve of Min-jun's business. Min-jun still thinks Morrison is naive about how the world really works. But they can sit in the same room without threatening each other, which is progress. You're really transitioning to legitimate business? Morrison asks during one visit, sipping tea in Min-jun's office. Naomi's influence, Min-jun admits. She's convinced me that Soo-ah deserves a father who won't end up in prison or dead by 40. So I'm adapting. It's not a fast process. You don't dismantle a criminal empire overnight. But Min-jun is slowly, carefully moving his assets into legal ventures. Construction. Real estate. Import, export, the legal kind. He'll never be completely clean. Too much blood, too much history. But he can be better. For Soo-ah. For Naomi. For the man he's trying to become. Eunicio watches these changes with bemused acceptance. One evening, sharing drinks after a successful, legal, business deal, she admits something Min-jun never thought he'd hear. Maybe you were right, she says quietly. About strength and vulnerability. About love not being weakness. You? Admitting I'm right? Should I record this? She punches his arm. Don't push it. I'm just saying, watching you this past year. Seeing how you've changed, how Soo-ah's changed. Maybe caring about people doesn't make us weak. Maybe it makes us stronger. More human. Are you going soft on me, Eunicio? Never. I'm just reconsidering my worldview. Slightly. It's as close to an apology as Eunicio gets. Min-jun takes it for the gift it is. But the real transformation happens on an ordinary Saturday. 30 minutes into our story and we've finally reached the end. Min-jun takes his girls to the beach. It's Soo-ah's first family trip since her mother died. The security detail is discreet but present. Min-jun isn't stupid. But for a few hours they can pretend to be normal. Just a father, his daughter, and the woman who saved them both, playing in the sand. Soo-ah is building an elaborate sandcastle, tongue poking out in concentration. She's got big plans, towers and moats and a whole architectural vision that makes no sense but fills her with joy. Naomi helps, offering engineering advice that Soo-ah promptly ignores. Min-jun and Naomi sit on a blanket nearby, watching. His arm is around her shoulders. She's leaning into him, her head fitting perfectly in the curve of his neck. It's peaceful. Domestic. Beautiful. Your mother would be proud of the father you've become, Naomi says softly. Min-jun stiffens slightly. They don't talk about Haewon often. The grief is still too raw, too complicated. But Naomi's right. Haewon would approve of the man he's becoming. Not the crime lord, but the father, the partner, the human. She'd be grateful you saved us both, Min-jun replies. I was drowning after she died. Pulling Soo-ah down with me. You threw us a lifeline. You grabbed it. That was the hard part. Only because you didn't let go. He kisses her then, soft and sweet, tasting of salt air and new beginnings. It's not their first kiss. They've had months of stolen moments, of learning each other, of building something real. But it feels significant anyway. Like a promise. Like a choice they're both making every day to choose each other despite the complications. You'll. Soo-ah's voice breaks the moment. That's gross. They break apart, laughing, to find Soo-ah standing there with seaweed draped across her head like a crown. She's grinning, eyes sparkling with mischief. I'm the princess of the sea, she announces regally. And I declare that kissing is yucky and you have to help build my castle. Your Majesty's wish is our command, Naomi says with exaggerated solemnity, bowing. They spend the next hour covered in sand, building Soo-ah's impossible dream castle. It's messy. It's chaotic. It's absolutely perfect. When they pack up to leave, the sun setting over the ocean in shades of gold and pink, Soo-ah takes both their hands. One in each of hers. Connecting them. Making them whole. Best day ever, she declares. And you know what? For once, Min-jun agrees. Not the most profitable day. Not the most powerful. Not the most impressive. But the best. Because his daughter is happy. Because the woman he loves is smiling. Because for a few precious hours they got to be just a family. As they walk back to the car, security falling in discreetly around them, Min-jun realizes something profound. He spent years building an empire thinking that power would keep his family safe. That fear and force were the only protection that mattered. But he was wrong. The real protection came from love. From choosing to be vulnerable. From letting people in despite the risk. From building something worth protecting instead of just protecting what he'd built. Chin is gone now, arrested by Morrison's team in a raid last month. The syndicate wars have cooled. Min-jun's transition to legitimate business is progressing. Things aren't perfect. They never will be. But they're better. And in the end, better is enough. So here's the question I want to leave you with. What would you choose? If you were in their position with all the complications and danger and impossible decisions, would you choose safety or love? Would you run from the darkness or trust that you could bring light into it? Because that's what this story is really about. Not crime or romance or dramatic rescues. It's about broken people choosing to heal together. It's about a man learning that strength and vulnerability aren't opposites. It's about a woman seeing past someone's worst self to their best potential. It's about a little girl getting the family she deserves. It's about choosing love even when everything logical says you shouldn't. Especially then. If this story moved you, if you felt something in the connection between Min-jun, Naomi, and Soo-ah, do me a favor, subscribe to this channel. Because there are more stories like this. More tales of complicated love and impossible choices and people finding their way to each other despite everything trying to keep them apart. And maybe, just maybe, these stories remind us that we're all capable of change. That our past doesn't define our future. That love, real love, isn't about perfection. It's about choosing each other every single day despite the imperfections. Thanks for watching this story unfold. If you made it all the way to the end, if you felt the weight of Min-jun's choices, if Naomi's courage inspired you, if Soo-ah's healing touched your heart, then this story did what it was meant to do. It connected with you. And if it did, I'd be incredibly grateful if you'd hit that subscribe button. There are so many more stories waiting to be told. Tales of impossible love, complicated families, broken people finding their way to wholeness. Stories that make you feel something real. Your subscription tells me these stories matter. That they're worth telling. That somewhere out there, someone needs to hear that change is possible, that love can heal, that even the darkest past doesn't define our future. So subscribe. Join this community of people who believe in the power of storytelling. And I'll see you in the next one with another journey, another family, another reason to believe in the beautiful mess of being human. Until next time.